We like to say that sports is the great unifier. So why don't we fracture that and talk about a very controversial topic that will split us right down the middle? I'm talking BYU. I'm talking Utah. It's the holy war. What's going to happen? We're talking about on a crossover edition of Locked On Big 12 and Locked On Cougars.
You are Locked On Cougars, your daily podcast on the BYU Cougars, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day.
Happy Wednesday, everybody. Welcome into a Locked On Big 12, Locked On Cougars crossover. I'm Drake Toll from America's #1 Big 12 podcast, Locked On Big 12. And that is Jake Hatch from Locked On Cougars. Thank you for making our shows your first listen every single day. In subject one, off the top of the show, because we have you, Jake, BYU will blow out Utah on the road in a rivalry win. If that's the statement, defend it. Then in the middle segment, Utah does the unthinkable, gets an upset. How do we get there if that happens? And finally, is this the most underrated rivalry in America and the best in the Big 12? We'll talk all of those things, but first, if you don't hit subscribe, we could lose our jobs. If you do, we likely keep them, and that's a good thing. Jake, will BYU make the case? If we come on Monday and say, hey, BYU blew out Utah, what went right?
They did exactly what they did 3 years ago when BYU snapped almost a 10-game slide. It was over a decade long. They lost 9 straight to the Utes. Kyle Whittingham, and in no uncertain terms, said after that game, I would have bet my house we would have beaten BYU up physically in the trenches, and we got manhandled in the trenches. That's the term he used 3 years ago. BYU is getting back to what they did 3 years ago in the trenches, and if BYU is going to blow out Utah, they'll do that exact same thing on Saturday night at Rice-Eccles Stadium.
How beneficial was, this is such a cheese question to ask this early, but they're both coming off of one. How beneficial was a bye week to BYU?
Very beneficial. Now, they aren't fully healthy because Connor Pay, their star center, is not going to be available this week. He's been on my podcast all season long, and he said he's targeting next week against Kansas as his return date officially. But BYU should be fresh. They should be ready to rock and roll. And I can tell you in the conversations I've had with folks in and around that football program, they are supremely motivated to keep this perfect season intact and also do it at the expense of sending Utah to a losing record on the season.
Yeah, Jake, the reason I asked that question, and which is such a stupid question to ask, is, how was the bye week? Because I saw earlier today, according to collegefootballinsiders.com, and I wanted to make sure that I got this correct, that I pulled it up and had it correct. BYU, according to the analytics, based on EPA, has an 88% chance of victory, and the projected final score is 33-17. The big reason why is efficiency for BYU defensively. 16th in the country running the football, 9th throwing against the pass and against the rush, I should say. Offensively, though, BYU doesn't rank as high. They're still really good. 13th running the ball, 32nd throwing the ball. Is there as large of a disparity between offense and defense as we once thought earlier this year?
I think there is still a disparity because, Drake, this defense continues to set up this offense with very short fields and advantageous situations.
Yeah.
The turnovers that BYU has forced this year have given BYU every opportunity. Remember, that Kansas State game turned on its head in 5 minutes of game time. And I know that K-State fans want nothing more than another crack at BYU. But the simple fact of the matter is BYU's defense has been opportunistic, and it's absolutely benefited this team. The other thing I will add, though, is the offense is starting to catch up to the defense because the rushing attack for BYU has come alive the past 2 games, north of 250 rushing yards the last 2 times they've been out on the field. If they can do that against Utah, that very well could be a similar scoreline to what they are projecting, that 33-17.
Yeah, Jake, these are, again, all based on the EPA. And for Utah, defensively, they're 68th against the rush, 37th against the pass. Those aren't terrible necessarily, but offensively, the Utes, 93rd running the football, 105th in the nation throwing the football. They don't have an offense, and they don't exactly have an offensive coordinator. How big does that play into a game where BYU could legitimately hold Utah to 10, 13 points, as many of their opponents have done recently?
Well, interim offensive coordinator Mike Bajakian better have something up his sleeve, because if he doesn't, it's going to be tough sledding. Now, they're going to be relying on two younger quarterbacks, either Isaac Wilson or Brandon Rose. They're holding that close to the vest, as they are entitled to do with regards to who their starting quarterback is going to be. But the simple fact of the matter is, Drake, no matter who's been under center for Utah outside of Cam Rising for that short stint that he was healthy, they haven't moved the ball at all. And if they can't move the ball against the likes of Houston, BYU's defense should be licking their chops.
Yeah. As far as the BYU offense goes, 3rd and 4th down success has still not been there. They're 41.8%, which is 60th in the country. And that's really one of the only places you could nitpick kind of the entire BYU team. Now, defensively, they're at 75th in the nation on 3rd and 4th down. What has it been about the late downs where BYU has actually gotten better over the course of the year, but they're still not on par with so many elite teams in the country?
I think philosophically is where the difference lies. For offense, BYU looks at them as conversion downs. They feel like some 3rd downs, they're looking just to get into a position where they can go for it on 4th down, because they're pretty elite with regards to their 4th down conversions this season. And that's where the philosophy kind of belies what you're talking about here. Now, they got, I think, to near 50% against UCF on 3rd downs alone. That was the best output of the season by far in terms of the conversion percentage on 3rd down alone. So that means it's trending up. Defensively, it baffles me, Drake. I do not get what BYU's doing on 3rd down. They seem to drop a lot of drop 8 and try and play zone and keep everybody in front of them. But guess what? It's getting carved up time and time and time again. They've got to change that. And I hope they spent the bye week maybe looking at maybe we bring pressure every so often and maybe force a little bit of a different look, because it has not been a good down for them defensively.
Talked a lot of numbers so far, Jake. Let's talk bodies, actual dudes. For Jake Retzlaff, the offense of BYU, and really anybody you want to choose on a defense that's become so elite, who has to have that legitimate stat line? This guy's got to step up, otherwise BYU loses.
LJ Martin. They got to have their star running back step up. He's been really good the last 2 times out since coming back from that high ankle sprain that he suffered early on in this season. He is a true bell cow running back. And this is a conference we all know has got very, very good running backs. I think LJ Martin is starting to really emerge into what I believe is kind of the next generation of star running backs in this league, Drake. So if BYU wants to win this game, they've got to control the line of scrimmage with that offensive line, and more importantly, control the time of possession. And you do that with a strong running game. And LJ Martin, he's absolutely got to be able to be that workhorse that BYU needs in this game.
Jake, I'm going to get your actual score prediction at the end of the second segment, but right now I want your best case scenario. If BYU does play the perfect game, what is the final score?
It's a two score game. Like, BYU wins by at least 14 points if they play the type of game that they envision, I believe.
Does that feel conservative? Is there a BYU fan right now who's typing in the comment section, only 14 points? Perfect game, Jake.
Well, here's the thing. I think any Cougar fan who has a rational thought in their brain knows how close this rivalry game. Rarely do you see blowouts. I think the last real blowout we saw was the 54-10 game in 2011 when Jake Heaps and the offense turned it over 7 times. It would take something like that to really, I think, create a blowout scenario in this one. It's a rivalry that routinely is within 7 to 10 points, and if history holds true, we're in for a good one on Saturday.
Well, we could certainly see the Utah Utes offense turn the ball over, and BYU's defense has been able to turn teams over at such a high rate so far this year, and many equate that to luck. Jake, coming up, let's talk about if BYU is, quote, lucky, and let's also talk about what happens if they're unlucky and Utah finds a way to build momentum. This is the Locked On Big 12, Locked On Cougars crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Hey, today's show is brought to you by Hims. Now, look, right now, sometimes intimate moments happen spontaneously and you need a little boost. That's what Hims is here for, because it is so discreet. Your sex life is important, but your schedule is busy. You don't have time to go to the doctor for ED treatment through Hims. You can get a personalized ED treatment without stepping foot inside the doctor's office door. So if you feel like you need a little boost in the bedroom, Hims is changing men's healthcare by providing you with access to affordable sexual health treatments from the comfort of your couch. Start your free online visit today at hims.com/lockedon. That's HIMS.com/lockedon for your personalized ED treatment options. HIMS.com/lockedon. The product mentioned are chewable compounded products which are not approved by or verified for safety or effectiveness by the FDA. Prescriptions require an online consultation with a healthcare provider who will determine if appropriate. Restrictions apply. See website for details and important safety information. Subscription required. Price varies based on product and subscription plan. That is HIMS. Jake Hatch of Locked On Cougars, Drake Toll of Locked On Big 12. We come together on Monday. Mm-hmm. Sunday, you'll do a show, definitely, that releases on Sunday because this game is so late. Mm-hmm. If the headline is Utah shocks BYU, wins at Rice-Eccles Stadium, what went wrong?
BYU turned it over a bunch. That's really the way that this is going to turn on its head. Now, Utah traditionally has been a very good team at turning opponents over. That's just kind of the hallmark of Kyle Whittingham's tenure at Utah. They routinely get pick sixes. They force fumbles, and they set their offense up in great field position, much like what BYU's done this season, Drake. But the season-long issue for Utah defensively is the fact that they have not been able to turn opponents over. So if they want to win this game, they need to get back to doing what they have done traditionally, and that is force turnovers and cause BYU to have to play catch up.
Jake, I've heard the word luck a lot recently about BYU. Are the Cougars lucky?
Yeah, there's a luck element to all that. It's an oblong ball that bounces different ways, but a lot of the time when it comes to what BYU's defense has done this year is they've created their own luck. They've been in good position to pick off passes. They have punched the ball out when given the opportunity, when a running back may be getting held up at the line. They have created plenty of turnovers, like I said, creating their own luck, but there is an element of luck in all of this. Like I said, that ball, it bounces weird ways, and the simple fact of the matter is BYU's been the beneficiary of it this year, considering last year they were very, very poor at turning opponents over.
Jake, in a segment where we're giving some flowers, at least, to Utah. Speaking of flowers, they went to 2 Rose Bowls and did lose both. Just going to throw that one in there for you, Jake. Just going to throw that in there for you.
Utah fans jumping down your throat here, sir.
I'm trying to give. I have the BYU guy on the show talking about why Utah might win. So I wanted to offer you flowers from myself.
Okay.
We've mentioned a bit. We touched on it. BYU is 60th right now offensively on 3rd and 4th down success. Those combined, you've talked about how setting yourself up for 4th down means that you didn't get a first down on 3rd. That can skew that statistic. But for Utah, their defense is still 6th in the nation on 3rd and 4th down, 29.5%. That's the small rate that opponents are actually converting on late downs. Should that worry BYU fans?
Absolutely, because you got to be able to sustain drives if you want to win this football game. And if you're going 3 and out constantly, guess what? I don't care how poor that offense is for Utah. If you can't stay on the field to generate points, you're going to have a tough time winning that football game. That's only going to embolden Utah in front of their home fans. This is a place BYU fans, BYU players know how crazy of an environment Rice-Eccles Stadium is, especially when BYU is there in Salt Lake City. I've experienced it multiple times in my life. There are very few places like it in terms of the home field advantage, and you do not, do not want to give Utah any extra juice, as it were, and that would obviously be going 3 and out constantly.
Jake, the opposite side for BYU and Utah, movable object meet stoppable force. Mm-hmm. We've already talked. BYU defensively, 75th in the country on 3rd and 4th down. Utah offensively, 122nd at converting on 3rd and 4th down. That is tough to do. 32.6%. Pretty darn bad. I just don't like who breaks here. It's tough to say, oh wow, BYU is going to certainly dominate that category because BYU is also not very strong on late downs defensively.
They've got to, if you're speaking from the Utah perspective, they've got to win this. They absolutely have to stay on the field because I don't care how it comes from the Utah side of things. They just have to find a way to generate points. This is an offense that has been stuck in neutrals far too often. I know that Houston got a big upset this past weekend after beating Utah the previous week, but still, that's a game that Utah thought they should have had in the bag, and they still found a way to lose that game. They have scored 24 points the last 2 games combined. That is just a recipe for disaster. So whether it's Brandon Rose, whether it's Isaac Wilson under center, you need to get ahead of the chains. And that means Mekhi Bernard, Jalen Glover from the Utah side of things. They got to be able to continue to move the chains and keep that offense on the field. And yeah, even if it is you're getting 3 points, you got to build that confidence with this offense. It's been a slog for the Utes. So if they want to win this game, they've got to win that battle. But from the BYU side of things, the BYU defense, they've got to show that, okay, we figured some things out in this bye week. We changed up our philosophy on third down, and we are not going to allow them to stay on the field. We're going to continue to force punt after punt after punt. And if they can do that, that's going to give BYU a major opportunity in this game.
Jake, I think you said Utah scored 24 combined their last 2 games. 21.
Oh, 21. Okay.
20. Isn't that? Yeah, it's even worse. That's that. You were trying to give them a little boost there. It's actually 21 points against Houston and TCU. They scored 19 against Arizona State, 10 against Arizona. So tough sledding the last few weeks offensively for the Utes. And that's because the greatest quarterback of all time, Cam Rising, has obviously been out. Jake, that said, I keep giving you reasons why Utah could possibly beat BYU analytically. And I want to throw that out the window because usually you do in a rivalry game. What about this rivalry gives Utah at least a fighter's chance? Because that's usually, that word rivalry means that the underdog has some moxie.
Well, we've talked a lot about luck on today's show already. There is a prevailing notion amongst a subset of BYU fans that I know very well that they talk about Ute luck, Drake, and they have talked about it for that 9-game win streak that Utah had during the 2010s. They talked often about there was a pick six, or there was a baffling turnover, or a blocked kick. Something crazy happened to help Utah win a game against BYU when it felt like BYU might break through. That luck, if it shows up in this game, it's going to be a much needed element for Utah to spring an upset over the 9th-ranked Cougars, because they want nothing more than to re-energize their season. And the best way to do that is to break your rivals' perfect season, push them to 8-1, and then push yourself back above 500 and get yourself within a game of bowl eligibility. That's a way to re-energize your season. And that's what Utah's got to be focused on this week.
I do think that Utah's defense is still good. People are going to point and say, I'm not really sure. But hey, I mention all the time, you have to have an offense that complements your defense, a defense that complements your offense. And the BYU does that so well. Hey, the defense forced a turnover, got into the red zone. I now worry a lot less about BYU's offense being able to finish off drives. Seems as though A-Rod has figured that out at this portion of the season. For Utah, their offensive success rate is 113th in the nation. Defensive success rate is 11th. It's that imbalance. Their defense is in such tough spots because the offense is so putrid. Jake, with that being said, with the analytics showing that BYU should win by 16 on paper, if you lose to this team, how devastating is that for Kalani Sitake and company?
Oh, it's going to hurt. There's zero doubt about that. It will be one of those ones that stings, because you look at, as you mentioned, the disparity between that offense and defense. Utah's defense has held their team in every game. Despite this 4-game losing streak, that defense has held every opponent down. You mentioned the fact that so it's 19, 10, 7, and you said 14. That's an average of 10 points per game on average, if my math is correct. Maybe a little north of that. Don't do math on there. I learned that many, many moons ago. But regardless, the defense has held Utah's team in these games. The offense has absolutely failed them in every facet of it. So, yeah, if speaking from the BYU perspective, it would be absolutely crippling to lose a game of this magnitude.
Yet knowing how poor Utah has been, again, namely offensively, losing for BYU would be devastating with so much on the line, too, in a top 10 ranking beside your name. The Cougars going for glory this week and trying to get themselves to a Big 12 championship. Jake, coming up, I want perspective on this rivalry, and I want your prediction for how this week's game is going to go. Here on a Locked On Big 12, Locked On Cougars crossover, part of the Locked On Podcast Network, your team every day. Today's show is brought to you by Z-Biotics. Z-Biotics saved my Halloween night. Now, look, I don't drink a ton, but Z-Biotics pre-alcohol probiotic drink is the world's first genetically engineered probiotic, and during Halloween night, I was like, I want to have 2 or 3 beers, but I have a flight at 6 a.m. tomorrow, and I don't want to feel bad. Would I feel bad? I don't know. I'm not going to risk it. I'm going to take Z-Biotics. It was invented by PhD scientists to tackle rough mornings after drinking, and here's why it works. When you drink alcohol, it gets converted into a toxic byproduct in the gut. It's this byproduct, not dehydration, that's to blame for your rough next day. Pre-alcohol produces an enzyme to break this byproduct down. Just remember to make Z-Biotics your first drink of the night. Drink responsibly, and you'll feel your best tomorrow. Go to zbiotics.com/LockedOnCollege to learn more and get 15% off your first order when you use Locked On College at checkout. Z-Biotics is back with 100% money-back guarantee, so if you're unsatisfied, they'll refund your money. No questions asked. Head to zbiotics.com/LockedOnCollege. Use code LockedOnCollege. for 15% off at checkout. That is Z-Biotics. Today's show is also brought to you by Game Time. Oh, wait a second. There's a game coming up this week between BYU and Utah. I wanted to go. First place I went was Game Time. And while I have generously had Utah fans reach out and offer me free tickets to this game, I was looking on Game Time, and they have the cheapest prices guaranteed for the Holy War. Curated deals make it easier to find the best price on great seats. They have a super deal every week as well, and you can get a seat view before you buy. And if you just toggle that little feature that says all-in pricing, there are no surprise fees at checkout. It's my favorite part of using Game Time. Right now, they have the lowest price guaranteed I told you about, or they'll credit you 110% of the difference. Take the guesswork out of buying tickets with Game Time Picks. Download the Game Time app. Create an account. Use code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off your first purchase. Terms apply. Again, create an account. Redeem code LOCKEDONCollege for $20 off. Download Game Time today. What time is it? It's game time. Jake Hatch of Locked On Cougars covering all things BYU. Jake, I'll be at the game this week. You'll be at the game this week. BYU, Utah. What makes this rivalry, I'll leave it general off the top, so special?
The fact that it literally exists 24/7, 365 around these parts. It's one of those rivalries, much like many of those ones in the Deep South we talk about all the time, that people just live, eat, and breathe it every single day. And it's in every facet of life here in the state of Utah. I grew up here. My best friend in junior high school, Drake, is a dyed-in-the-wool Utah fan. I grew up a BYU guy. You should have heard some of the arguments we had in junior high, just bickering back and forth about this rivalry. And that's just a microcosm of what this rivalry is. It literally splits families. It is so unique in how it dominates every facet of life here, but it extends itself to the dominant religion around these parts, the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It obviously involves a state school against a religious school. There are so many different facets that it invades, but it legitimately, it is in every facet of life in the Beehive State.
Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, or on second reference, LDS, which could be appropriate here. Moving forward, for sake of brevity, that's where I'll go. But that is such a big part of what I've found going to Provo or going to Salt Lake City, is that buried deep within this rivalry, there is an entire faith aspect that so many schools or rivalries miss out on. And by the way, one of these isn't an inherently religious institution. It's just the fact that the LDS community runs so deep with both universities. How much truly is that at play when these two teams meet on a football field?
It's a play because you have guys who have served missions for the church on both of these squads. A lot of them grew up together playing in the same youth leagues, and they just know each other so well if they're from in-state. And the out-of-state guys come in and they feel it. The fans are talking to them constantly, whether you're a BYU or Utah player, talking about the opposing team and how much you, quote-unquote, hate the other team and you need to go beat them for us.
Yeah.
These conversations happen all the time, Drake. And the thing about it is Brigham Young, who obviously BYU bears his name as their institution's founding member. Guess what? He also founded the University of Utah. So this has existed forever. If you really want to look back at the history of BYU and Utah, the rivalry, the very first time these two schools got together for an athletic endeavor, Drake, it was a baseball game. And in true BYU Utah fashion, it ended in a good old-fashioned brawl. So that should tell you everything that you need to know. And that's back in the 1880s, I believe, when that happened.
That's awesome. Would you argue that Brigham Young's favorite university of the two is BYU?
Well, he's got his name on the university.
That's great. I love the in-state aspect of the players, Jake, because you look at both of these rosters, there are so many Utah guys, and I want to emphasize that is rare anywhere you go in this country. Typically, you look at a roster and it's like, all right, half the team is Texas, California, or Florida, no matter where you are. But there's so much Utah representation of these two teams, and they win football games outside of the state of Utah, but now get to come home and play each other. Talk to me about the state aspect that plays in.
There's family pride at stake that obviously you're putting on for your university. And like I said, a lot of it's baked into the fact that you either grew up in a BYU family or a Utah family, maybe a blended family. Some of them are Utah fans, other ones are BYU, and whichever side you pick, you're putting on for that school, but more importantly, your family. This is a state, Drake, that we're very family oriented out here. We traditionally have very large families. And the thing is, people love being from Utah. There is it's a little brother syndrome, as it were, like a persecution complex as well, maybe in the state of Utah, where it's like Utah against the world. But the state of Utah loves to represent itself on the national stage, and this rivalry is one of the best opportunities to do that. Now, would I have liked to seen this game maybe in a more prime spot TV-wise rather than it being 10:15 Eastern time on a Saturday night? Sure. But that there's going to be people who will say, oh, BYU Utah, they're playing. I'm going to stay up for that game because they know the history of this rivalry and they want to see how these two do battle. Yes, it would have a lot more luster on it if Utah were not on a 4-game losing streak, but this is a rivalry that these two schools and the players that play for them want to put on for their state, want to put on for their family, and more importantly, they just want to put on a show for the nation.
Jake, had you told us preseason that BYU would be a top 10 team going into this game, you would certainly think Utah was there too, or within the region. It created maybe the biggest matchup in the nation this week with College Game Day on hand, but Utah somehow didn't hold up their end of the bargain, and now BYU is favored on the road.
Hey, yes, on that part. So you remember the preseason predictions for the Big 12, right? And Utah was number 1.
I do remember those. Yes, Jake.
BYU's number 13.
Yes, I remember those.
You know where these two schools are this week?
No way.
BYU's number 1.
No way.
Utah's number 13. So there you go.
Oh, that is great. I too didn't have faith that BYU would be at this level, and no one did. 6-6 was my prediction, and many BYU fans have been like, you know what, 6-6, cool. We went to a bowl game. That was the metric that you and I even discussed preseason that Kalani and company needed to hit, and now they are in the top 10. Jake, nationally, is this one of the more underrated rivalry? We talk a lot about like a Wisconsin and Minnesota. Those are two different states, and they don't have this on the line. Should we be talking about it more?
Yeah, I believe so, but like I said, I'm biased. I live here in this state. I've lived with this rivalry my entire life, but I think the biggest thing that held it back, Drake, was the fact that it was in the WAC. It was in the Mountain West. BYU was independent while Utah was in the Pac-12. I think the fact that this is now I believe it's the best rivalry in the Big 12, and this is a league that is starting to garner more and more eyeballs as they continue to kind of beat the crap out of each other every week. This rivalry, I think, is going to take on a newfound respect nationally as these two teams play at the highest level of football now in the Power 4 ranks. So, yeah, I feel like it's been underrated for quite some time, but I think given the time and obviously the platform that this will now give them in the Big 12, you're going to see a new, I think, era of how cool and how, I guess, big this rivalry ends up being registering nationally, because I really do think that these are two teams. They legitimately despise one another in many respects, and they want to get after one another on every single level, and the fans do it better than almost anybody out there, maybe outside of Auburn and Alabama fans. But it really is a rivalry that has been highly, highly underrated for years, and I'm hopeful that in the next 2 to 3 to 5 years, we're going to see this rivalry take on a whole new shape, and the national media will pay more attention to it.
Yeah, Jake, I do believe it's the best rivalry in the Big 12. It's in-state, and it's as heated. Not only is it as heated as it is, but to me, you've seen a history of two schools who have been underrated overall on the national scale. There was so long that the state of Utah did not have a power program based on conference affiliation, yet still one of the two schools would be ranked, or both schools would be ranked. There'd be a way in which one team had some national twist to it to where everyone was paying attention to the Holy War, and that is what's put it at such prominence. And maybe it's the fact that both were so overlooked that they hated each other to climb the ladder of finally being seen nationally, and Utah got there first into the Pac-12, and BYU got to the Big 12, and now BYU's top 10, Utah's unranked, and we get all of that glory on Saturday. Jake, I can't wait. I'll see you there.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. We got tailgate going on just down the street, so I'm going to have you stop by and say what up, all right?
I love it. I will be there. My flight leaves Saturday morning from Savannah, Georgia at 6 a.m. Yeah.
How long are you on the ground for then, all told?
I will land at like 10 a.m.
Okay.
So I've got a full day of just nothing but BYU, Utah, Holy War, from pig bus to church. I'm sure they'll have some sort of service pregame somewhere, and I'll find it. Post pig bus, I'll probably need it. Jake, where can folks who want to find more of your work go?
Locked On Cougars, wherever you get your podcast, just like Locked On Big 12, also available on YouTube. Subscribe, as Drake said, because, we like these jobs. We like to keep them long-term, so help us out. Just
Usually.
a humble plea on that side of things. Now, the other thing I wanted to mention is you can find my thoughts on all things social media at Jacob C. Hatch on X, and also the show is on social media, Facebook, Instagram, and Twitter at Locked On Cougars.
Jake Hatch, thanks so much for joining the show. Oh, we're back. A little blackout there for fun. This has been It Always Will Be. We'll be talking all week long, including tomorrow on the Big 12 squad about BYU and Utah. Again, this has been It Always Will Be, a crossover edition of Locked On Cougars and Locked On. Thanks for making it your first listen every single day. Dose Grande.